Good morning and welcome to On the Record with Buddy Cianci. My guest this morning is a person who is not a stranger to this show or to my radio show for that matter on WPRO. My guest this morning is a person who is 30 years head of the executive director of the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council, who is revenue commissioner also for the state of Rhode Island, director of administration. Now he heads up the founding director actually of the Hassenfeld School for Public Leadership at Bryant University. Gary Sasse. How we doing, Gary?
Pretty good. How you doing, bud?
Good. Early, happy holiday season. I have my Christmas tie on, as you notice.
I have to get mine out of storage.
All right. Anyway, a lot of things have been happening lately. We've been going a mile a minute. Let's turn our attention to the state of Rhode Island first. You know, the governor of Rhode Island had published but went on video and said it's working. She has, I guess, a review of her 1 year in office, almost a year in office, and yet we have tolls that are not, you know, the toll situation, the highway and bridges are not solved, and who knows if that's going to get solved soon. But I wanted to ask you about something you're very good at, and that's knowing numbers, because you ran the state budget and advising governors and mayors over the years. My question to you, there was just, very rarely does the Finance Committee come back when the House is not in session. They came back this week, and they're very concerned about a $47.7 million that we're overexpending in the budget, and I'm wondering if we ought to be concerned about that. This isn't the previous budget. This is Governor Raimondo's budget. It's her budget year, and started in July 1, and we're already $47.7 million over expenditures, and so much so that the legislature comes back and says, "Wait, what's going on here?" Should we be concerned?
Well, we should be concerned, but it's a manageable situation. Oftentimes, a state budget will have expenditures that exceed what was budgeted. Now, if you told me they were overspending at the rate of $100 million, I'd be more concerned than $47 million. So $47 million, there's still time to get that in balance. But the other side of the equation that hadn't been talked about is we closed last year with $48 million more surplus than was anticipated. And this year, we're estimating that revenues will run about $51 million ahead of what was
Originally projected.
For the budget. So net, we're better off, but $47 million is too much. It's important to note where it's coming from and what can be done. Most of it is coming from agencies within the Department of Health and Human Services. And that's been a constant case. They're not making their targeted Medicaid savings. There are increased costs at the institutions. There's increased costs for the so-called Unified Health Information System.
Is that computer system?
Yes, that's
correct.
correct.
It went from, I forgot what the number was, but it's up to $390 million for a computer?
And that should be investigated. But
that thing should be able to cure cancer,
so,
I mean, for that kind of money.
So the legislature was right in bringing in the agencies to ask the questions why. And what ought to be done at this point is the agencies ought to come back to the legislature in 30 days with a corrective action plan to show them how much of that $47 million that they can save on and reduce the supplemental budget.
Well, at least you have to give the legislature, you got to give them kudos where they're deserving. And at least the legislature came back. I mean, before their session opens, they came back on their own, the Finance Committee, and they said, let's have hearings and find out. You got to give them credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not the first time they've done it. They've held December hearings before on the budget status. But to put the budget status in context, there should be no overspending. We know where the overspending is in place, and now we need to come up with a plan to show how we can resolve it.
That's a big number to make up, though, $47 million.
Yeah, except it is a big number, but on the other side of the equation, our revenues are doing much better.
But we also have structural deficits, don't we?
Right, we have a structural deficit, and the structural deficit in fiscal 18, which is the year that'll start July 2017, is about $230 million. The structural deficit for the budget for next year is probably about 85 million based on the new revenue estimates. So we have a structural budget deficit. But think about this. You're managing a $3.5 billion budget.
3.75, is that what it is?
It's almost $3.6 billion of general revenue. It's about 8.7 when you put federal money
in there.
Everything else in there. And you're running $47 million off. That's a manageable percentage.
All right, I don't know where it gets 47, but I guess the state of Rhode Island gets 47. But let's move down to the city of Providence, because they have the same kind of problem.
Oh, it's much worse.
Yeah, much worse.
Much worse.
Moody's came up with a negative outlook for the city of Providence. They got to go out for bonds to fix schools, and ironically, the state's going to pay for 80% of that. but still Providence is going to issue the bonds. And they came back with a negative outlook, and frankly, they cited reasons such as a deficit for last year, the year that ended June 30th. They say they've spent pretty much all their rainy day funds, all their money that they're supposed to have kind of in storage in case something happens. There's not a lot of economic outlook that's good, supposedly, in the report, they said. So shouldn't the city council, now the city council says, we just passed the budget, but we have to manage it. The reason I bring this up is not to be parochial about Providence, but the fact is the state of Rhode Island picks up a good portion of the bills for the city of Providence. For instance, in the school bond, they're paying 80% of it, of the $10 million. They also pay 42% of the city's budget when you draw the bottom line, right around that number.
But mostly schools say that.
Yeah. My question to you is, should the council be, what should be happening there? And the Auditor General already sent a letter saying, give me a plan. But what about the Fiscal Stability Act or whatever they call
well,
it?
it's time to implement it. You know, just to put the issue in context, you're right. Last year there was a $5 million deficit.
Yep.
This year there's a projected deficit of more than that. I'm guessing 15 to 20 million.
Yep.
There's a structural imbalance. 25 cents of every dollar goes for fixed costs, pensions, health insurance. There's no economic development plan. The property values, commercial property values in the city are plummeting. Look what's happened with the Journal, building.
Yep.
And so you have you're really on a slope to a real fiscal problem. Now,
And the Superman building.
And the state law was amended several years ago to provide for state oversight. And the state oversight is in 3 steps. The first step is for the Director of Revenue to appoint an overseer.
And that's a job you once held.
Yeah, I would.
If you were in that job today, what would you be doing regarding the city of Providence?
There'd be an overseer down there. Yeah, and the overseer's job is pretty simple, and that's to come back to the Director of Revenue and to the mayor and say, this is how you can balance the budget. The overseer doesn't have power except to investigate and
report back,
recommend solutions. Now, the Director of Revenue can appoint an overseer if certain conditions are met, and the Director of Revenue can appoint that overseer at his or her sole direction. Don't need the governor's approval, don't need anybody's approval. And 2 of the criteria have been met. One criteria is deficits. A deficit in the current year and a projected deficit. So we have the deficit situation. Another criteria is a downgrade from a credit rating agency.
Which just happened.
We weren't downgraded, but put on negative watch. So I think that's happened. So before we get really worse into the soup, the Director of Revenue should appoint the overseer, and the overseer to take the 30 or 45 days, whatever's needed, to get to the bottom of it. Now, there are 2 other steps which become much more draconian. If the overseer doesn't see a way to balance the budget, then the Director of Revenue can appoint a budget commission. And that gets serious because at that point the powers of the budget commission could supplant the powers of the elected officials of the community.
And that's happened in this state on a couple of occasions with East Providence and I believe East Providence, but certainly Central Falls and certainly I believe Woonsocket.
Woonsocket and East Providence, and years ago before this law was in place in West Warwick as well. Now, if the budget commission can't resolve the problem, then a receiver is appointed. And that's the ultimate power because the receiver can take the city into bankruptcy. So before getting too excited, there's enough evidence right now that the city's finances are headed to a very bad place. There's a state law that was put in place specifically to help avoid those kind of crises. And it's long past due where the overseer be appointed by the Director of Revenue.
You know, and is it politics why they haven't done it? Because the Auditor General sent a letter saying, we got a problem, give us your plan. And then this other law, as you say, was passed so to come in and assist cities like Providence, who were in this jackpot. And the revenue commissioner for the state hasn't done anything about it.
Well, I don't know the reason, and I don't know what informal conversations have gone on and how informed the revenue commissioner and revenue director and the governor are.
Maybe you'll be watching the show, and those criteria that for intervention do exist.
Oh, they
do exist.
The law was now, the interesting thing is, and this is a concern about a revenue commissioner implementing the law. This administration has never appointed a permanent revenue commissioner. Dave Sullivan, who was the director of revenue, who was director of revenue on an acting basis, never had a permanent appointment. Now, he's announced that he's leaving state service on December 11th, and so we're in a really precarious position, is that we don't have a revenue director who has been confirmed, who's been appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature, because the truth of the matter is, if you're going to carry out the powers and duties of that office, it's certainly good to be in a permanent position to do it.
No, that you're permanent.
And it's certainly good to have the legislature, you know, giving you advice and consent, so you feel like you have the authority, in fact, to carry out the law. And I think it's really been quite unfortunate that we've gone through a year of this administration and there's not been a permanent director of revenue appointed.
But it's working. Doesn't that video that the governor put out say it's working?
I don't think the revenue department was mentioned in that video.
All right. So now, okay, so we see the city of Providence, which is not a basket case, but something's got to be done very, very quickly. And one of the things we have not talked about is another horseshoe that could be thrown at right in the head of the city of Providence, is this firefighter situation, which could prove to be extremely problematic if they go to arbitration the 16th of December,
Absolutely.
And the firefighters win that. That's another $7 or $9 million
Yeah, and
that the city doesn't have.
And I was including that in the deficit.
Yeah.
I think that'll be happen this
Yeah.
year. Well, you know, you don't wait till your house burns down to call the fire department. It's really that simple. You know, there's smoke coming out of the city hall in Providence. And the state has a legal responsibility to find out what's happening, to intervene to the degree that's allowed in law, and they're sitting on their hands as far as I can see.
That's unfortunate. Anyway, we'll have to just stay tuned and see just what action the Revenue Commissioner takes, if there is a Revenue Commissioner.
Revenue director.
The Revenue Director. We'll see what happens. All right, let's go on to something else. I noticed that, you know, Citizens Bank, which is a wonderful, big institution in Rhode Island. They split off with Royal Bank. They went to a big, huge, I guess, public offering. And here they're going to stay in Providence with their 53, or with their headquarters, but they're spread around 3 or 4 different locations. They were looking to go to the Superman building. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to put your economic development hat on. It was a very quiet thing. All last summer, they were looking to come to take that dinosaur building over. It's terrible to have that big economic giant, if you can call it that, the Superman building, just lying vacant there. What needs to be done there? Citizen says they're not going there. That's basically it. What can you do from an economic standpoint, or from a state standpoint, or a city standpoint, in your opinion, to take over some sort of plan that would give new life to that building?
You know, I really don't have an answer to that question. You know, for years I served on the board of Citizens Bank. And if I was on the board now, I would have had severe reservations about moving into that building because of the environment downtown, because of the antiquated nature of the building, and because of the growing demands of the bank to consolidate.
You were on the board there.
For not recently, but
yeah,
I was
you were.
for a while. And so and what the problem with the Citizens building is, you know, markets drive decisions.
Not the Citizens building, the industrial.
The industrial building, I'm sorry, the old Fleet building. Yeah, markets, you know, drive economic development. Jobs drive economic development. And it's really a chicken and egg kind of proposition. You have to have the market and the demand for jobs to fill the real estate, and we don't. And if you don't, it's very hard to know. You can subsidize that thing till Christmas, and that doesn't mean it's going to be successful. Work. That's right.
So I have no idea what's going to happen there. The Citizens was a hope, but now they've pretty much eliminated themselves from the competition.
But the good news is they're
staying in Rhode Island. That's good news.
That's the good news.
All right, on the good news, we'll end this segment and come back with Gary Sasse. But stay tuned for more of Gary Sasse and the former head of the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council to tell us about expenditures. We'll be right back. All right, here we are back again on the record, Buddy Cianci. My guest, Gary Sasse, the founding director of the Hasselfeld Institute for Public Leadership at Bryant University. Just recently, the governor put out a video saying that it's working. And I noticed also that some do-gooder groups, like to call them that, all met at the State House, and they implored the governor to be more transparent in her administration. So for them, I guess it's not working. And frankly, you know, this administration has been criticized not being as transparent as possible as they should. And even just recently, the Truckers Association issued a clarion call. You know, they said, "Hey, listen, Governor, you got to tell us how you're going to toll these, how you're going to take care of these tolls, because you haven't told us how much they're going to be, you haven't told us where they're going to be, you haven't told us anything that we really like to know." And frankly, with the legislative season that's coming upon us, what do you think? I mean, do we really need to put 17 or 18 or 20 gantries up in the state and to toll the trucks in the state? That's going to hurt a business. I speak to Chris Maxwell. He was on the show not long ago. He said, look, truckers are just going to divert. They're not going to, if they don't have to come through Rhode Island, they're not going to come through Rhode Island. They're not going to pay the tolls. There's a dispute as to how many trucks the governor says is going over those highways and how many that really are going over those highways. They want to do a revenue bond. What do you think needs to be done in order for...
Well, I think the first thing that needs to be done is there needs to be transparency, and we need to get the facts out. You're asking me, you know, what's the solution? And we have a tremendous schism between, you know, what the truckers say, the number of trucks and the revenues that will be produced from tolls, versus what the governor says. And unless, you don't have to agree on the solution, but unless you can agree about 90% on the facts, how can you go to the credit rating agencies and the bond market and say, we want to borrow hundreds of millions of dollars, and we have a dispute between the industry and the state on how much revenue is going to be produced? That's not a creditable position for the state to be in. So I think we really need adult supervision to the extent of having a transparent conversation. The conversation should look at more than one option. It should look at the governor's option. It should look at the Republican pay-as-you-go option. It should look at some ideas you and I and others have discussed of a combined, you know, pay-go
and also,
plan.
one of the things you came up with, that a general obligation bond, which the voters would have to vote on, would be a lot less expensive because of interest rates. When you do a revenue bond, the revenue bond interest rates are much higher than a general obligation bond.
Yeah, we did some work elsewhere on a $150 million issue, and the question was a revenue bond or a general obligation bond, and this was done about a month ago. And what we found is that the projected interest rate on a general obligation bond was about 3.25%. It was over 5% on a revenue bond. And so on that little small but $150 million issue, over 20 years is about $45 million difference.
So on a $500 million, it's going to be a big difference.
Yeah, and see, there's no Democrat, Republican, or liberal or conservative way to finance a plan. There's the most cost-effective way to finance it. That's arithmetic and numbers. And so there certainly is, I think, a more efficient, more cost-effective way to accomplish what the governor and others want to accomplish about fixing the bridges. But you can't have that argument if the leadership of the legislature and the governor are not willing to get all the information on the table and to have the debate and confront the facts. And so it's a very difficult question to answer.
And that's going to come up this January, and a year has gone by, almost a year, and we haven't had we're not any closer to passing or fixing the bridges than we were a year ago.
And keep in mind, of the $500 million that the governor is talking about for the program, we would end up spending $1.1 billion. We'd spend as much on interest payments to Wall Street as we would to fix the bridges, and that 80% of the amount that we'd borrow, as I understand, would go to the 610 connector project.
Yeah, and now they don't even know if they want to do that project the way they originally intended it, because there's a group that has been rising up saying, hey, listen, why don't we take a lesson from the Route 195 area? You know, we decided we were going to take that 195 down years ago. It was planned to have, you know, boulevards and a grid system of roads that would be more or less connecting neighborhoods. They want to do the same thing with the 6 connector now, if you saw that.
Yeah, I think it's worth looking at, because if you go back and look at history,
it's probably cheaper.
And there's things that we know today that we didn't know a while ago, but when we were building the interstate system and we built 95, we cut neighborhoods in half in Providence.
No question about it. Fox Point, all that area was gone as a result of that.
And so just think if we had been more thoughtful about what urban redevelopment was really about? Would we have located that highway in the same place in the same way? I think not. And so those are very important debates to have. And to go ahead and just say I want to put up 17 tolling booths and spend $40 million for gantries and $500 million on interest payments without having this discussion may cause us to regret what decisions we make. So spending another 30 days, being transparent, getting the information out, looking at the options, having an honest discussion always is the best policy.
Schools. We just know that our schools are not performing as they should. We saw the results of the test, and whether you believe in the test results or don't believe in the test results, the fact of the matter is we didn't do well, and we spend a lot of money on education. The fact is that there's also, when you go from one city to the next, you'll find that incomes, the higher income areas obviously have got the kids who are doing better on the test, obviously. But there's a school aid formula that you were part of originating. Now there's a new committee that's going to review the school aid formula. What needs to be done in order to equalize the school aid formula or make it better than what it is, and get the money where it's going to go? Or does the money go where it's supposed to go?
Well, that's a good question. You know, you can tinker with the formula and you could fix it at the margins, but in this state, there is not a constitutional right for a kid to have an education.
That's right. There is no right. There's no federal right to an education.
There's no enforceable state right, and most states have that. So I would ask the question is, if you want to fix a system and give districts that feel they're not getting enough money to meet the needs of their kids and their communities, first thing to do is fix up the Constitution and make education a right. This goes way back. In 1944, when President Roosevelt spoke about the four freedoms, he was going to extend the Bill of Rights to say the right to an education. Well, kids in Rhode Island don't have a right to an education. It's what the legislature says it is any session that they're in office. So before you fix up the formula, let's fix up the law. And
okay. So, but the formula today, presently,
it's pretty good.
Is based on, well, it's based on the wealth of a community. It's based on the taxable wealth of a community, I should say, the taxable wealth of a community. It's based on poverty. It's based on the, I guess, on the ability for a community to pay, and then when you have those big poverty levels or the high poverty levels in a state or in a city, then the money that the state's going to allocate goes to those cities, the Pawtuckets, the Providences, the Central Falls.
But what it doesn't do as well as it should, it doesn't look at the different needs between communities, and when you address problems of kids that have been in failing schools for generations, who are in poverty, you have to have some flexibility in how you meet that need, and that's the side of the equation that needs more work.
Okay, and now this committee is reviewing, because it's supposed to be reviewed every couple of years. Am I correct? Because that's just kind of a road thing, and just automatic routine.
Yeah, this committee is going to look at questions: are we spending enough on special ed? Are we spending enough on kids that are English language learners? But what you have to recognize is each time you fix up the formula, you don't have a zero-sum game. You pick it. You have a finite number of dollars to distribute, and so as you change the distribution formula, you take money from somebody and you give it to somebody else. And you really have to look at whether that candle is worth the game sometime.
Whether that candle's worth the game, okay. The other thing that, when you look at education, there are those who are advocating for a statewide teacher contract. I think I know your feelings on it, but is there anything good about it?
I can't think of anything very good about it.
Healthcare, maybe costs.
Well, yeah, you can examine, healthcare with the possible Cadillac tax coming in. There may be ways for the state and the school districts to work together in providing health insurance, but when you negotiate a contract, if you separate the economic issues, from the work issues and work rule issues, and you go to the union and say, we want to change work rules, or we want to have a longer school day, or fix up the system.
It's going to be very problematic.
You have to pay for that in the collective bargaining process, and so if you've already taken the economic issues off the table, it's very hard to think how you get reform. The other issue, and I'll say this very quickly, If you negotiate a statewide teacher contract and you reach a stalemate, the entire state gets closed down. You've got 140,000 kids without a place to go. You've got 280,000 parents looking for daycare, and politically you could sustain that strike for maybe 3 days, if not 3 hours. If that happens, the leverage completely flips in favor of the union and not the taxpayer.
I've been through that. I don't think we have enough time to do this, but the Supreme Court is going to be taking up a case, I think, this session at the Supreme Court about the unions and whether or not the Obamacare tax, or whether or not people have to even belong to a municipal union.
Right, and this is a California case.
Yeah.
And some person in California.
That could really lunge at the heart of the union.
Oh, it could lunge at the heart of the union. And I get another. I would challenge the the people who want a statewide teacher contract to ask the question: where there are statewide teacher contracts, are they right-to-work states, not collective bargaining states? That would be an interesting thing for them to find out.
But the Supreme Court is going to make that decision as to whether or not someone is required to be a member of a municipal union.
Pay dues, required to pay dues.
Required to pay dues. Well, that would, if they say no, that's going to be very, very painful to the unions.
Then essentially you develop a right-to-work system. Yeah.
I can't help, we only got a minute, but I can't help resist. 30 seconds. You have a Marco, in the disclaimer, you might even see the Marco sign there. Marco Rubio, Gary is on Marco Rubio's committee nationally and also locally. How's your man doing?
Well, I think
in 30 seconds. I noticed he became, in the latest poll, Quinnipiac, he's number 2, or number 2.
Well, the campaign is on schedule. I think he's doing a very good job getting his message out. But this campaign is like nothing anyone's ever seen, with 10 candidates and one candidate having 20% of the vote. So you got to keep on going, get your message out. But there's going to be a lot of water over that dam.
I'm surprised. I'm not surprised because he's an articulate guy, but to see him climb all the way to number 2, when the holiday season is coming now, and there won't be much activity.
Because he is the candidate that represents change, and people are looking for change.
So. You might be right, Gary Sasse. Thanks very much for being with us, and thanks for watching 6 News on the Record with Buddy Cianci. Stay tuned for more great programming on Channel 6, your Southeastern New England affiliate for ABC. Have a great afternoon.